For 3,000 years, one civilization ruled the banks of a single, life-giving river, that is longer than the time between the very first pharaoh and Cleopatra, the very last. It began with mud brick towns, and ended with an empire that shaped the whole ancient world. Along the way, kings buried their servants alive to serve them in the afterlife. One child took the throne at 6 years old, and is said to have ruled for 90 years. Their records are so ancient that legend says the Nile once flowed with honey for 11 days. They raised the tallest structures on earth, and their tombs would stand for 40 centuries. Women ruled as kings, priests overthrew dynasties, and foreign armies came again and again. This is the complete story of Egypt's pharaohs, from the first crown to the final fall. It is a story of gods, gold, war, and a river that made all of it possible. So let us begin where Egypt itself began, over 3,000 years before the birth of Rome. In the beginning there was not one Egypt, but two rival kingdoms facing each other, and one man was about to bind them together forever. Around 3,100 years before the Common Era, Egypt was split in two. The north was Lower Egypt, a sprawling green delta where the river fanned into the sea. The south was Upper Egypt, a thin ribbon of farmland pressed between desert cliffs. A southern king named Menes, also remembered as Nama, set out to unite them both. In battle, he crushed the north and claimed the double crown of the whole land. He wore the white crown of the south, fitted inside the red crown of the north. For the first time, one man ruled from the delta all the way to the cataracts. To hold this new kingdom, Menes built a fresh capital where the two lands met. He named it Memphis, and it guarded the join between north and south. From here, Egypt's first dynasty of god-kings would begin to rule. The pharaoh was not just a king, but a living link between his people and the gods. His word was law, his image was sacred, and his tomb would be a monument. But the earliest kings had a dark and bloody way of preparing for death. In the first dynasty, a dead king did not travel to the afterlife alone. Servants, guards, and even favorite animals were sacrificed and buried around his tomb. They were meant to keep serving their master forever in the world beyond. One of these early rulers was not a king at all, but a queen named Mernith. When her husband died, she stepped in and ruled Egypt around 2,900 years before the Common Era. That made her one of the first women ever to rule a great nation. In her tomb, archaeologists found a full-sized boat buried in the sand. It was a solar boat, meant to carry her across the sky with the sun god. Over the centuries, Egyptians slowly abandoned the horror of human sacrifice. Instead, they buried small carved figures called shaptis to do the king's work. Each little statue would magically labor in the fields of the afterlife. This was a gentler faith, but the ambition of the pharaohs was only growing. Soon they would reach for the sky itself, in stone that could not decay. Around 2,600 years before the Common Era, Egypt entered its old kingdom. It was an age of peace, wealth, and the greatest building projects the world had seen. At its heart stood a king named Giza, who wanted a tomb like no other. For this, he turned to a brilliant advisor and architect named Imhotep. Until then, kings were buried under low, flat mud brick mounds called mastabas. Imhotep had a daring idea, to stack 6 mastabas one on top of another. The result was the Step Pyramid, the first great stone building in human history. It climbed 60 meters into the sky, a stairway for the king to reach the gods. It was surrounded by courtyards, shrines, and a great wall of gleaming white stone. For the first time, Egyptians proved that stone could make a king immortal. Imhotep was so admired that centuries later, he was worshipped as a god of wisdom. But this was only the beginning of Egypt's obsession with the pyramid. The next kings would dream far bigger, and build the largest tomb ever made. During the 4th dynasty, a king named Khufu wanted the grandest tomb of all. On the plateau of Giza, he ordered the building of the Great Pyramid. It was built from over 2 million blocks of stone, each weighing tons. For nearly 4,000 years, it was the tallest structure anywhere on Earth. Its sides were once cased in polished white limestone that blazed in the sun. Khufu's son Khafa built the 2nd pyramid, and guarded it with the Great Sphinx. The Sphinx still gazes east toward the rising sun, its lion body carved from bedrock. The 3rd and smallest pyramid belonged to a king named Menkaure. His stone sarcophagus survived thousands of years buried in the desert. But while being shipped to Europe, the ship sank, and it was lost at sea forever. Together, these 3 pyramids became the wonder of the entire ancient world. They were built by paid Egyptian workers, fed with bread and beer, not slaves. Yet all this glory rested on the Nile, and the Nile was about to fail them. The 6th dynasty brought one of the strangest reigns in all of history. A boy named Pepi II took the throne at just 6 years of age. Traditions claim he lived to 100, and ruled for over 90 years. That may make him the longest reigning monarch in human history. But ruling for so long left the kingdom weak, and its treasury drained. As the old king faded, provincial governors grew rich and greedy. These local rulers, called nomarchs, began to act like little kings of their own. When Pepi finally died, no strong heir could hold the whole land together. Then the Nile itself betrayed Egypt, with year after year of weak floods. Without the flood, the fields dried, the harvests failed, and famine spread. People went hungry, order broke down, and the great kingdom shattered. The age of the pyramid builders was over, and darkness followed. Egypt was about to fall into its first age of chaos. Around 2,100 years before the Common Era, Egypt fell into disunity. Historians call this the First Intermediate Period, a dark and troubled time. With no strong pharaoh, the country split into rival regions and warlords. Local nomarchs fought each other for land, grain, and power. Ancient texts describe rivers of blood, and the poor rising against the rich. The low Nile floods that began the crisis kept returning, deepening the famine. Some wrote that men would kill for a single loaf of bread. Tombs were robbed, temples neglected, and the old certainties collapsed. Yet even in the darkness, two great cities began to rise as rivals. In the north, the city of Heracleopolis claimed the crown. In the south, an ambitious family from Thebes gathered its strength. The Theban kings dreamed of reuniting the shattered kingdom under one ruler. War between north and south would decide the future of Egypt. At last, a Theban king conquered the north and reunited the two lands. This began the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's second great golden age. The pharaohs moved their power south and rebuilt the strength of the state. For the first time, scribes carefully dated events by each king's regnal years. This age valued good government, fair kingship, and skilled writing. The pharaohs also became warriors, pushing Egypt's borders far to the south. The greatest of these was a fierce king named Senusret III. He drove his armies deep into Nubia, the gold-rich land upriver. To hold it, he built a chain of mighty mud brick fortresses along the river. These forts controlled trade in gold, ivory, and precious stone. Under his rule, Egypt grew rich, ordered, and secure once again. But prosperity attracted outsiders, and Egypt's borders would not hold forever. From the east came a new people with weapons Egypt had never seen. Around 1,650 years before the Common Era, Egypt fractured again. A foreign people from the Near East settled, and grew powerful in the delta. The Egyptians called them the Hyksos, meaning rulers of foreign lands. They conquered Lower Egypt, and ruled the north from their capital at Avaris. They won because they brought a fearsome new weapon into Egypt. It was the horse-drawn chariot, fast, deadly, and unstoppable in open battle. They also introduced the horse itself, an animal Egypt had never used in war. With chariots and composite bows, the Hyksos outmatched Egyptian foot soldiers. For over a century, foreigners wore the crown of the north. But in the south, the proud Theban kings refused to bow. They learned to build chariots and horses of their own for the fight ahead. A war of liberation was coming to drive the foreigners out. It would launch Egypt into its most glorious age of all. A Theban king named Ahmose I finally led the Great War of Liberation. He drove the Hyksos out of Egypt and chased them into the eastern desert. Around 1,550 years before the Common Era, Egypt was whole again. This began the New Kingdom, the greatest and richest age in Egyptian history. Now Egypt would not just defend itself, but build a vast empire. Its armies pushed north into the Near East, and south deep into Nubia. Gold, timber, and tribute poured in from conquered lands across the region. The pharaohs used this wealth to raise temples of breathtaking scale. At Thebes, they built the vast temple complexes of Karnak and Luxor. Kings were now buried in hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings. This was the age of Egypt's most famous and powerful rulers, and one of the very first was a ruler no one expected to rise. Not a king, but a queen who would crown herself pharaoh. Around 1,479 years before the Common Era, a queen took power. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she began as regent for her young stepson, but she soon claimed the full throne, and ruled as pharaoh in her own right. To fit tradition, she wore the royal kilt and even a false ceremonial beard. She presented herself in art as a king, powerful and divinely chosen. Rather than waging endless wars, she made Egypt prosperous through trade. She sent a famous expedition far south to the rich land of Punt. They returned with gold, ebony, exotic animals, and living myrrh trees. Her greatest legacy was her stunning mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Its tiers of columns rose gracefully against the golden cliffs of Thebes. For over 20 years, she gave Egypt peace, wealth, and beauty. But after her death, her stepson tried to erase her name from history. That stepson would grow into Egypt's greatest warrior king. Hatshepsut's stepson was Thutmose III, and he became a military genius. Historians later nicknamed him the Napoleon of Egypt. He led as many as 20 victorious campaigns across the ancient world. At the Battle of Megiddo, he took a daring narrow mountain pass to surprise his foes. His enemies were routed, and the city fell after a long siege. He pushed Egypt's borders to their greatest size in all of history. His empire stretched from deep in Nubia to the great river Euphrates. He was not only a master of land war, but of the sea as well. He is credited with building the very first navy of the ancient world. With ships, he could strike enemy coasts and supply his armies by water. He recorded every victory on the walls of the great temple of Karnak. Under him, Egypt reached the very peak of its power and reach. Yet within a century, a strange king would turn Egypt upside down. Around 1,350 years before the Common Era, a radical king rose. His name was Akhenaten, and he launched a religious revolution. He swept away Egypt's many gods and their powerful priesthoods. In their place he worshipped just one, the sun disk called the Aten. Some scholars even call his faith a kind of early spiritual atheism. He denied the old gods and left out the dark netherworld entirely. He built a brand new capital in the desert called Akhetaten. His art broke every rule, showing his family in tender, intimate scenes. Beside him stood his famous and beautiful queen, Nefertiti. For a few years, Egypt turned its gaze wholly to the living sun. But the people missed their old gods, and the priests wanted power back. When Akhenaten died, his revolution was swiftly undone. His city was abandoned, and a young boy was left to restore the old ways. The boy left to fix Egypt was only about 9 years old. His name was Tutankhamun, the most famous pharaoh of them all. Guided by his advisors, he restored the old gods and their temples. He abandoned his father's sun city and returned power to Thebes. But Tutankhamun died young, at only around 18 years of age. He was buried quickly in a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings. His tomb was packed with treasure, chariots, thrones, and gold. Then, for over 3,000 years, the world completely forgot him. In the year 1922, an archaeologist finally found it. It was the only royal tomb ever found nearly untouched by robbers. The dazzling gold mask made this forgotten boy world famous overnight. But the true power of the new kingdom lay with a king yet to come, the greatest builder and warrior Egypt would ever crown. Ramesses II became the most powerful pharaoh of the new kingdom. He ruled for an astonishing 66 years and fathered dozens of children. He covered Egypt in temples, statues, and monuments to his own greatness. At Abu Simbel, he carved 4 giant statues of himself into a mountain. But his most famous moment came on a distant battlefield. In the year 1274, he marched against the mighty Hittite Empire. The two armies clashed at Kadesh, one of history's greatest chariot battles. The Hittite king Muwatalli ambushed Ramesses and nearly destroyed his army. Legend says Ramesses fought back almost alone until his troops rallied. The brutal clash ended not in victory, but in a bloody stalemate. Yet back home, Ramesses carved it as the greatest triumph of all time. His propaganda made him a living god in the eyes of his people. But behind the boasting, both empires were exhausted by war. After Kadesh, neither Egypt nor the Hittites could truly defeat the other. Years of costly fighting dragged on with no clear winner. Both empires also feared rising new powers on their borders. So around 1259, the two superpowers chose peace instead. They signed the world's first recorded peace treaty in human history. It was written on clay and silver tablets in 2 languages. The treaty promised no more war between Egypt and the Hittites. It pledged that each would defend the other if attacked. To seal it, Ramesses even married a Hittite princess. For decades, the two great empires lived in genuine peace. A copy of that treaty still hangs today at the United Nations. It proved that even ancient enemies could choose diplomacy over blood. But Egypt's golden age was slowly slipping toward its end. After Ramesses, no pharaoh could hold the empire together for long. Around 1069 years before the Common Era, Egypt broke apart again. This began the Third Intermediate Period, a long age of weakness. In the south, powerful high priests of Ammon ruled from Thebes. The pharaoh's power was now shared with temples and rival dynasties. Foreign families began to seize the throne of the once mighty land. Libyan chieftains from the west ruled parts of Egypt for generations. Then kings from Nubia in the south conquered and reunited the land. These Kushite kings deeply respected Egypt's ancient traditions. They even revived the ancient custom of building pyramids for their tombs. Their pyramids were smaller and steeper than the giants of Giza. For a moment, an African dynasty gave Egypt one last flash of glory. But a terrifying new empire was marching toward the Nile. In the year 671, the fearsome Assyrians invaded Egypt. Their iron weapons and brutal tactics overwhelmed the defenders. Egypt, once the conqueror, was now the conquered land. Then, in 525, the Persians arrived. The Persian king Cambyses II crushed Egypt's forces. He turned the ancient kingdom into a heavily taxed province of Persia. For nearly 2 centuries, Egypt paid tribute to distant foreign kings. Then, in 332, a young Greek conqueror arrived. Alexander the Great took Egypt without a single battle. The Egyptians hailed him as a liberator from Persian rule. He founded a great new city on the coast and named it Alexandria. When he died, his general Ptolemy took the throne of Egypt. A Greek dynasty would rule Egypt for the next 300 years. The Ptolemies were Greek, yet they ruled Egypt as true pharaohs. They blended Greek and Egyptian gods, art and customs together. The last and most famous of them all was Cleopatra VII. She was brilliant, spoke many languages, and fought to keep Egypt free. She allied with the Roman leaders Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But Rome had grown into a power Egypt could no longer resist. In 31, her fleet was crushed at the naval battle of Actium. With defeat certain, Cleopatra chose to die on her own terms. Legend says she died from the bite of a venomous asp. In the year 30, Egypt became just another province of Rome. After 3,000 years, the age of the pharaohs was finally over. Yet their pyramids, temples, and treasures still stand and astonish us today. The pharaohs are gone, but their eternity in stone endures.